English presentations all day, and the translators are doing a great job. So thank you for having them here. I hope you as well for you as they did for me. We've heard a lot today about the battle between science and faith and the history of the church and some of the atrocities and other problems that religion has added to humanity and our civilization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the rest of the world, about some of the things going on with religion in places where we probably don't know about. But I wanted to start with talking about coming to a conference like this, a colloquium, because I remember the first free thought convention I ever went to was about 16 years ago. And I had just discovered there was an atheist community out there only a month or so prior. I had just gotten a computer and heard about something called the internet, and I logged on and I started a search engine and I typed in the word atheist. I don't know why, but I discovered this amazing community that I thought I was the only one in the whole world that thought this way. So coming to something like this was really a remarkable experience, just to make connections with others and realize that, well, just the thrill of having a sane conversation and not worrying about Jesus suddenly appearing in the conversation. We will be having a prayer after this, but anyway, it really was probably one of the most remarkable and affirming experiences I had in my life up to that point, because I had grown up in a world surrounded by religious people who never even questioned or never even allowed themselves to question whether anything that they had thought or believed in was true. And so here I was struggling to try to make sense of the world, and not a lot was when it came to religion. And I was really struggling until I came to that convention. Once I went to that, though, I was a changed person. I no longer cowered with the fear that someone would discover my irreligiosity. Did you get that, translator? Irreligiosity. I was not the crazy or morally deficient or brain-damaged individual that I had thought that maybe I was. And I was finally able to re-engage with the world, confident, proud of my non-belief. I mean, it was really such a transformative experience. My life, my humanity had really, literally, I think I could say, had been restored. And with that, I became obsessed with learning everything that there was about there, this whole body of literature and history about religion and Christianity that I had no idea up to that point had existed. I just knew the Bible stories told in Sunday school, or what the pastor told me on Sunday, which wasn't very much. So when I discovered all that was there, I just consumed that material like a starving man who had stumbled across the king's storehouse. I learned about how Christianity was used to justify the conquering of Rome, and then justify the royal patronage. I learned about the hundreds of thousands of people slaughtered over the centuries over differences in Christian doctrine. I learned how Christianity ushered in the 1,000 years now known as the Dark Ages, where we learned, or where we lost, almost all of the knowledge that had been discovered by the previous Greeks and Romans. Now, we only recently have recovered most of it. I learned about the intrigues, the wars, and the crimes of all popes. I learned how Christianity drove European colonialism and the enslavement and slaughter of so much of the non-European world. And my newfound interest in studying the Bible revealed the brutal tribalism and misogyny of the Jews, led by a very sadistic God throughout the Old Testament. And a New Testament with the Jesus who, once I actually paid attention, seemed to do little more than offer a few parables and perform a few magic tricks, but who was then co-opted by a fanatical ex-Jew who turned him into the savior of mankind. The pastor didn't mention that on Sunday. and with the discovery that everything we know about Jesus actually came more than a half-century after his death. And in fact, no secular sources took any interest in the Jesus cult for a whole another century. Well, how can that be? Well, maybe Christianity had some flaws, so I turned to some of the other faiths out there. I turned to Islam. Wow, I thought Christianity had problems. I learned that Islam was spread almost entirely by the sword, with its early days filled with power struggles and assassinations between the imams, and divisions that go on to this day. I also learned how, as we heard today, how Christianity stood in the way of science. From the imprisonment of Galileo and the burning of Giordano Bruno, to today's denial of evolution and obsession over abortion and stem cell research. Rather than being on the forefront of bringing light and knowledge to the world, Christianity consistently served to obstruct and hold back progress, and used any and every tool it could to preserve its power at the sacrifice of all else. I admit, I did not expect to find all this in my consumption of all this history. I certainly never got it in my Christian upbringing. I guess I expected to find reasonable justifications and evidence as to why Christianity was a reasonable, if not necessarily valid, belief. That, a few hundred years ago, the world made sense that way. But the more I learned, I never found that. What I found was that the more I learned, the more damning the evidence was that Christianity was a fraud from day one. I made sure I asked Gerardo before I gave this talk, are there any blasphemy laws in Mexico? He said, no, I hope he's right about that. But, finding all that evidence, I became really, really angry at the entrenchment and the promotion of Christianity in my community in the face of all this evidence. And how community and spiritual leaders not only ignored the evidence, but actively worked to suppress it. Well, I had been prepared, even though I was no longer a believing Christian, I was prepared to feel some compassion and tolerance for those who maybe still believed that Christianity had some truth to it, that if I felt that their mistaken belief was simply a matter of ignorance or misunderstanding, well, anyone can make a mistake. But all my research pointed to some pretty disturbing facts. That there is, and there has always been, a worldwide fraternity of well-funded apologists and institutions that are determined to maintain and even extend the power and prominence of their particular religion at almost any cost. And I found that unbelievable, given what I had grown up to think religion was all about. At the beginning of the 20th century, with much of this historical and cultural understanding that I just shared with you, many Western philosophers, politicians, and great thinkers predicted the end of religion within just a few years. Obviously, they were wrong. 1 century later, it seems that the special interests interested in maintaining religious belief are having major success in keeping that belief intact, even having a major resurgence worldwide. So the question is, how can they be so successful with that, knowing what we know today? What are the tools, what are the circumstances that they are exploiting to perpetuate this belief? Well, we know today that religious belief is not based on intelligence. While there is some evidence of religious skeptics having a higher mean of intelligence than the general public, there's some evidence of that. We do not find the opposite. We do not find religious people having a lower average intelligence from the general public. We can say that ignorance and information sheltering probably does play some part in keeping people religious. But there are a lot of very intelligent, very brilliant people with strong educational backgrounds who nevertheless still hold on to their religious beliefs. So, intelligence is not part of the equation. We also know that the doctrines of most religions aren't very important. When I became an open atheist, one of the most fun things we thought we'd do when I found my local atheist community, we would go out and we would have a little booth out by the beach. And come talk, ask the questions of the atheists, ask the atheist. And we would love to spend the afternoon meeting with Christians and explain to them why their beliefs were wrong here, wrong here, wrong here, wrong here. And I'm sure many of us at the time thought we were doing a great public service, but I think in reflection we were actually just the entertainment for the Christians for the day on the beach. Because it really didn't matter. I mean, they may not know much about the doctrines and the history of the church or anything, but that's really not why they're there. No one signed them up because Jesus proved himself in front of Satan for 3 days and was offered the rest of the world and he turned it down. That's not why anyone's a Christian. They've been told that they're probably a Christian because they believe in the resurrection of Jesus and that caused all sorts of forgiveness, but that's probably about it. Most Christians, I've discovered, at least in the United States, don't know the Bible. They don't care. It's not relevant. That's certainly the position of the Catholic Church. You do not need to know the Bible to be a Christian. So let's just take that off the table. Doctrines are not part of the equation. Giving the right argument to the Christian is not going to change anything. We do know also that family traditions do play a strong role. 99% of religious believers hold the belief of their parents, which in turn is based on the place they were born. If you were born in India, you are most likely going to be a Hindu or Muslim. In the Middle East, you'll definitely be a Muslim. In Latin America, you'll probably be a Catholic, and in the United States, probably a Protestant Christian. And something I've heard several times here at the conference today, the church does a fantastic job of offering family services. They help young families raise their kids. They promise moral education. They recognize births, marriages, and deaths. They offer rituals and acknowledgement of these important life cycles. Atheism, not so much. Maybe that's something we need to look at. But then let's go back to the larger forces that I mentioned a few minutes ago. We know also that since the beginning of civilization, government has always been entwined with religion. For most of history, it was one and the same. Your government brought the religion to you, and the religion supported the government. That's no longer the case in much of the world, but it certainly hasn't sundered that relationship. It's still a very close relationship, even in places like the United States. In fact, the United States being historically the first nation to separate church from state, has since become one of the biggest funders and exporters of religion in the world. And it does it through two sources. The first is the U.S. military. The U.S. military, you probably know this, but it is by far, its budget alone is larger than the combined military budgets of the rest of the world. It's a budget of $1 trillion a year and hosts more than 750 military bases around the world. Now, I don't think there's even 750 countries out there. I think it's less than 200. So do the math. That's a lot of saturation of just U.S. military bases. In the 20th century, I think it was after World War II, And despite our constitutional restrictions in the United States, the U.S. Congress professionalized the U.S. Military Chaplain Corps. They brought in chaplains to all 4 military branches and provided a huge job boom for the U.S. religious community. In the 1980s, hiring quotas for different denominations was lifted, and evangelicals began filling the ranks of the chaplain corps for all the branches. And within a very short time, and with tacit permission of U.S. military and political leaders, they changed the role of chaplains. They began to actively proselytize to both U.S. soldiers and overseas civilians. Now, a lot of this has happened in the past 10 years, and we're just now becoming aware of a lot of what we consider a lot of constitutional abuses with this. Everything from mandated prayer rallies for U.S. soldiers who are being trained in their jobs to purchasing weaponry from companies who stamp the barrels of the rifles with Bible verses, publishing official military version Bibles, even purchasing, manufacturing, and passing out tokens with Christian Bible verses on it to pass out to children in Iraqi and Afghani villages, which I just find incomprehensible. Incomprehensible. I don't know how you hope to win over an Islamic community by telling him Christ is the way to go, especially when you're holding a gun. So, the budget of the military is $1 trillion a year. Well over $1 billion of that is targeted just for the chaplain military corps, the military chaplain corps. And with that, and the 750 bases around the world, the chaplain corps of the U.S. military has become one of the largest Christian outreach organizations on the planet. And think about that. They have agents in all 180, 190 countries out there. And they're actively engaged with the local populace as well as our military. So that's source one, where the U.S. is exporting religion. Source two, almost as significant, is the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department has a grants program for overseas development called USAID. This program received $19 billion in U.S. funding in 2009. When George W. Bush came to the office of the presidency in 2001, he issued an executive order creating something called the Office of Faith-Based and Charitable Initiatives. The biggest effect of that was that the U.S. State Department changed all those grants to ensure that anybody who got those grants made sure there was a religious component attached to them. So if you want to go build a school in Uganda, you're going to have to get permission from the local priests, pastors, ministers. You're going to have to make sure that they have a job in that school. You want to treat AIDS in Kenya? You're going to work with the local minister to have them be the one administering the healthcare updates, treatments, and examinations. And beyond that, if you're a church that wants to do this in the United States, even if there's a great secular organization that's been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, helping maybe feed orphans or address poverty or build water systems, if you're a church who's never done this before but you want to and you'd like to get some of that grant money, guess who goes to the top of the list immediately? That's gone on since 2001 and has just accelerated over the past decade. The election of President Obama has not appeared to change any of that. We know today also that this grant program is used by some of the largest Christian organizations in the world. The largest Christian charity group that I think is out there is called World Vision International. Has an annual budget of about $1 billion. Now, I know World Vision International because they're the ones, at least in the United States, that run pictures of these desperate, destitute young kids, and they say for $5 a week, we'll feed this poor child and give them education and clothing, and et cetera, et cetera. They also help with adoptions, bringing overseas orphans to the United States. Well, they're quite popular. They have $1 billion budget a year. But it's not all private donations. 40% of it comes from the U.S. State Department. Not only that, the president of World Vision International sits on the council that President Obama created when he came to office to create an oversight committee to make sure the money was spent appropriately, constitutionally, whatever. So he is one of the people sitting on that council. How objective is he going to be about how the money's spent? All right, so that's the government. That's just the government. The United States has a lot more going on too. It's a very wealthy country, a very religious country. It has a very active private religious sector. Most U.S. Protestant church groups promote a tithing of 10% of a family's income each year. The top 15 Christian ministries in the U.S., and this is not including service charity groups like World Vision International, but churches that actually focus on simply converting new Christians. The top 15 ministries in the U.S. all have annual budgets between $100 and $500 million a year. That's a lot of change to go find some new Christians. Evangelical Christian U.S. media networks. Now, there's about a dozen of those that do nothing except put out Christian broadcasting, and they do it worldwide. They reach almost 500 million viewers worldwide each year. And now, all those things don't even include the churches that actually send out missionaries to other parts of the world, and send them out to Latin America, to Asia, to India. Not even touching that. So you see, my argument here is why the United States is probably one of the largest forces promoting religion around the world. Other organizations worldwide that are pushing things like this. And here's one of the things that just kind of made me laugh and made me sick at the same time when I saw it, because I knew this was one of the U.S. ministerial organizations. There's a group called Campus Crusade for Christ. They are very involved in U.S. universities, colleges, especially the sports programs. Well, do you remember in Chile, of course, the mining accident there, and the 33 miners trapped for 2 months? If you were watching, like the rest of the world was when they popped out of that hole in the ground, you saw at least 24 of them wearing T-shirts that proclaim, "Gracias, Señor." The T-shirts were provided by Campus Crusade for Christ in Chile in order to make sure that everyone saw that when the miners were rescued, to give glory to God, promote Christianity. It turns out during the 10-week ordeal, they actually earmarked thousands of dollars to provide movies and videos and podcasts of anything Christian related to be fed down that hole to those miners, along with the food and the water that was being sent down there in the meantime. We never heard about any of that. We just saw the T-shirts that spontaneously appeared when they popped out of the ground. So that's kind of the Protestant view of the world. The Catholic view of the world, we're probably quite aware of the recent scandals going on there with child molestation. Of course, those who know the history of the church know there's nothing terribly new there. That's been going on a long time. But it has recently gotten much more attention, attracted lawsuits and settlements in the billions of dollars, and has threatened to bankrupt entire dioceses. Okay. And in my opinion, you know, the response by the Pope and the Vatican has been despicable. They deny it's a problem, they blame it on others, they say it's because of gay people, and those nasty liberal secularists. Again, you get this mix of amusement and sickening, and I'm like, yeah, it'd be funny if it wasn't so important. I'm going to write what I wrote here, because I was writing this out, and I kind of get passionate about it, so I said, yet this criminal syndicate enjoys recognition as a sovereign country and continues to enjoy special access to many world governments despite its moral failings. Yeah. So, as awful as all those scandals have been, as devastating as they should be, because, you know, as the justification for putting the Catholic Church on a hit list by every government in the world hasn't been justified. We know the Church isn't going away. That's not how they do things. They will come back. They survive every scandal. This won't be any different. You would think, at least, countries such as Argentina or other Latin American countries that have a clause in their constitution mandating that they support the Catholic Church might say, maybe we should reconsider that. Maybe we should, you know, take that out of there. That's kind of embarrassing. But I don't know, you probably know this. I was surprised to discover in the 1990s, Argentina elected a Muslim as president. But because of that clause in the Argentinian constitution, he had to switch his faith to Catholicism before he could become president. Well, I can rail and rant about the Catholic Church for days on end if you want. But I want to ask this question here. Is it still anti-Catholic bigotry if you're pointing to the criminal behavior they enable? Isn't that kind of like a robber accusing his victim of bigotry if the victim calls for his arrest? It's amazing. What else does the Catholic Church contribute to, good or bad here, besides pedophilia? Let's talk about the story of Mother Teresa. I thought that was a really instructive story, if tragic. I mean, here's a woman who devoted her life to the Catholic Church under the guise of helping the poor and the sick, and then Christopher Hitchens came on the scene. Where we learned how Mother Teresa was, well, kind of a fraud and really more of a propaganda tool for the Catholic Church to raise millions of dollars. And why was she a fraud? Why would he make such a claim? Because it turns out that all the money that she raised for her clinic didn't get spent at the clinic, didn't get used a dime. She turned it all over to the Catholic Church and continued to use dull needles, cool compresses, and basically prayer because she believed that suffering was good for us and that's what Jesus wanted to do. But that wasn't the best part of the story. The best part of the story was after she died. And this correspondence came out, private letters that showed she had long held serious doubts about whether God existed. I mean, it frightened her. So, and she dealt with it by just throwing herself into her faith, becoming fanatical and promoting the church and promoting the suffering of those who came to her place. She just kind of went to the edge, trying to shove that doubt down into the darkest recesses where no one could see it. You know, this is a textbook example of someone who manifested their own psychological pain and just projected it onto others. I mean, had she been encouraged to admit and embrace her agnosticism, if that had been okay to do, or if she'd been given some better answers about her faith that made sense, what would her life really have contributed? Would it have made a far larger difference than what it actually turned out to be? We'll never know because that wasn't an option that was ever given to her. Islam. There's a word to scare you right there. Certainly becoming more visible in the Western world. We're seeing a lot of it through acts of war and terrorism. And probably not surprising given that most of the Muslim world sits on most of the world's oil reserves that the industrialized countries want to make sure they control. So I don't think Islam has changed all that much in the past 20 or 30 years. It's just that we've taken more interest in their land and their people, and they're complaining about it. My opinion. But setting aside the militant Islamic attacks we're seeing, the suicide bombings, the stuff that really catches in the news, if you look a little deeper, we're seeing broader swaths of the Muslim community pressing for special religious rights and privileges in the West, especially as they immigrate to places in Europe and the United States and Latin America. And from that, setting aside the terrorist stuff, just from that we are learning that Islam's pretty intolerant of any potential criticism or competition. We know that in most Islamic countries, not is it only illegal to promote any other religion, or atheism, but any perception of anything less than full and passionate support for Islam risks jail and even death. And not just for the offender, but for his family. Gerardo introduced me as the president of Atheist Alliance International. We've been trying since I took office to help organize some sort of atheist free thought community in the Muslim community or in the vicinity. That we quickly gave up on trying to find an international Islamic country, but we thought, well, maybe Malta or Tanzania, maybe you can find. And interestingly, there is a whole internet. The internet has been such an amazing, dare I say, blessing for the and it has brought so many of us together in ways that make it a lot safer than it has ever been before. So there is an entire atheist Arab network filled with hundreds of people who live in Muslim countries who don't want anything to do with Islam, who are atheists. But it's the only safe way they can connect and find each other. They all have anonymous names. No one knows where anybody lives. They told me a story where once 4 of them risked coming together for a lunch in Lebanon once. And they had the lunch. And then one of the 4, his family found out that he went to this. They put an incredible amount of pressure onto him to rededicate himself to Islam. And he immediately went to turn in the other 3 that went to lunch with him that day, as proof of his dedication to that. So ex-Muslims are not in any hurry to be visible in any way out there. It's a very, very scary, difficult place to be. Blasphemy has been a major part of what's come out of this, and very much in the news. Now, I guess it came to my attention first with the case of Salman Rushdie. This was back in 1988 when he published a book called The Satanic Verses, and the Iranian Ayatollah Khomeini at the time issued a fatwa of death. They didn't know what that meant or how serious it was, but it turned out to be very serious. And the hiding, and many people spent a lot of money trying to find him. He's still in hiding actually at this point, because he just doesn't know whether anyone's going to continue to take that seriously or not. We all saw another flood of violence released in 2005 when a Danish newspaper published some very silly cartoons of Muhammad. Like we know what he looks like. I don't know, but that incident resulted in the destruction of 3 Danish embassies, the deaths of over 100 rioters. Western media, Western governments sat up on that and started putting out suggestions that, well, maybe we ought to pass some laws that restrict people from doing this. And those have continued to build. Pakistan, let's talk about Pakistan. Pakistan is probably the most aggressive country in the world for prosecuting blasphemy. They arrest an average of 1 person per week on blasphemy charges. And just so you're clear on this, the legal penalty for blasphemy in Pakistan is death. Now, most of those they arrest, they are convicted, but apparently the state doesn't really carry out, or doesn't work too hard to carry out the death sentences. Instead, they leave them in jail for a while, and then they release them on the chance that no one will notice when they leave. But, of course, if the local populace does notice when they leave, the released prisoner gets faced with a mob, lynch mob, and is often killed that way unless he finds a very clever way to escape the country very fast. Famous free thinkers like Taslima Nasrin, Ayaan Hirsi Ali fall into the same category because it doesn't take a whole lot to be accused of blasphemy. The laws are often used to settle neighborhood grudges. You got a Christian living next to you in a nicer house than you do? Accuse him of spitting on a Quran. In fact, recently in Pakistan, in the past couple months here, there is a Christian Pakistani couple who's been arrested on charges of blasphemy for handling a Quran without washing their hands first. So you might easily imagine how this law creates a huge climate of fear and paranoia, even among devout Muslims. Nonetheless, we see the West moving towards adoption of such things themselves. Now, I always thought blasphemy was the most victimist crime you could come up with, right? I mean, who's the victim here, right? It seems to be a civil rights call in the 21st century. Britain, who didn't have a case of blasphemy since 1920, and who actually stricken the laws off their books in the 1970s, had their first blasphemy case in the 1990s from a person who brought a common law charge. It's not statutory, it's not on the books, but because it was there one time and Britain has a rule of common law, they were able to bring a charge of common law blasphemy against a newspaper, a gay newspaper, for publishing a poem suggesting that Jesus engaged in homosexual activity. Well, they were convicted, although the appeals court did throw out the jail sentence, but they still had to pay a fine. Tony Blair then immediately proposed a new blasphemy law that would impose a 7-year fine for insulting another religion and inciting religious hatred. The law was passed and is on the books today. Ireland, when they became independent, they had a constitution that included blasphemy as an offense in the constitution. However, because there was no legislative statute passed, it had never been enforced until 2009. Seeing these incidents of fatwas and the scare of the Muslim community that way, Ireland's parliament got their act together in 2009 and passed a statute defining blasphemy. Pretty much the same law that we saw in Britain. Blasphemy statutes were never stricken from places like Canada or Australia. And even though they were discontinued in the Soviet Union with the rise, again, of Russia and the Orthodox Church there, in 2003, a museum director in Russia, in Moscow, assembled an exhibition of artifacts that criticized the Russian Orthodox Church. Well, there was a group of men who were so upset about this, they broke into the museum and they defaced the art. The museum, whose guards caught the men in the museum, turned them over to the law enforcement and began to press charges. But what the state prosecutor decided to do was they dropped the charges against the burglars due to lack of evidence, and instead put the museum director on trial and eventually convicted him of for a $3,600 fine for incitement to religious hatred. Then there's the UN. The Conference of Islamic Organizations is a group of a lot of Islamic countries. They have been pushing a proposal in the United Nations for many years now to declare that there is a human right for religion to be free of criticism, basically an anti-blasphemy law. Fortunately, the US and other Western countries, as well as many private human rights organizations, have pushed back and declared that the concept of defamation of religion is fundamentally inconsistent. We don't give rights to ideas or institutions, we give rights to individuals. However, they keep bringing the proposal back every year, hoping that the General Assembly will pass it. And every year, they get a higher percentage of the General Assembly supporting it. Last year, that vote was in the high 40% range. So this may become a more serious issue sooner than we think in the UN. Catholic, Protestant, Islamic missionaries have all ravaged Africa over the past 2 centuries. The continent is awash in superstition and corruption. It's racked with conflict as religious groups promote intolerance and demand special privileges for their group. Charismatic religious leaders amass fortunes and dominate politics at the expense of the gullible masses, who are squeezed of crops and monies for magic spells from their leaders to improve their lot. These leaders are courted as well by conservative US Christian leaders who promise more wealth and power in exchange for promoting the Christian leaders' anti-gay, anti-abortion agendas. This pressure has led to legislatures such as Uganda, where a bill criminalizing homosexuality under penalty of death is seriously being considered. Other African Pentecostal leaders have taken it upon themselves to go into villages and promise to improve, make the promise of the village go away. They don't have enough food, they don't have enough water, they've got sickness going on. The leaders come into the village and promise to take that all away by rooting out the child witch that's making it happen. For a fee, of course. Once fingered, the alleged child witch is abandoned by their family and driven from their village, left to fend for themselves, if not outright killed. We had a member of Atheist Alliance International in Nigeria confronting one of these Pentecostal leaders who was making quite a lot of money over doing that and making a big deal and basically driving hundreds of children into the woods, into the jungles to become orphans. And he confronted her about it, went to the news media, went to the government and said, look, she's a fraud, who needs to be stopped. And the woman was able to not only ignore his claims, but turn around and sue him and everybody in his family for defamation of character, for daring to question the power and legitimacy of what she was doing. I've gone over quite a bit of history and quite a bit of scary things that are going on around the world. The challenges for free thought in the 21st century and the threats aimed against it are clear. Religions are well-funded, well-organized, and determined to recover their loss of status, prestige, and power at any cost. Their propaganda needs to be confronted and challenged. The religious freedoms ushered in by the European Enlightenment are under siege like never before. However, the free thought community does not have the luxury of centuries of power and organization or wealth to defend our freedom of conscience. It's us here in this room, right now. That's the vanguard. So it's imperative that we take this challenge seriously, that we organize counteroffensive to these assaults to protect our rights as well as the rights of others. We need to create and build the communities and support organizations that the churches had, but based on reason rather than faith, to counter the appeal of those institutions. And most importantly, we need to be out with our atheism. I don't know how many of you saw this on the table out there. This is a brochure that encourages just that, because a lot of the bigotry towards non-religious people is there because nobody knows an atheist. They don't know what they are, they just take what the word of the pastor is that says what they're all about. So we need to become visible, put a face to the demons that religious makes us out to be. That's why I wear this pin, and that's why I come to conferences like this and be part of organizations like this. Well, allow me to close by reaching back to some of my past, by borrowing some biblical passages in the style of some of the Protestant missionaries I have listened to. We know the failings of religion by the fruits they have dropped over the past two millennia. We need to let our lights of reason shine, and shine brightly in order to push back the shadows and demons of faith. And by so doing, we will build our communities and our countries on the solid ground of science and empiricism rather than on the shifting and unstable sands of faith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart, for a great speech. So we have time, we'll do some time for the speech. So, any questions here? How will we manage this? I have translated this issue. No. Who's first? Okay.
Oh, I wanted to ask you if you have like some advice for these people in Europe that under the false pretense of respect and understanding are submitting themselves to like these oppressive Islamic ideals, like all these women in England that are adopting the burqa as a sign of, I don't know why any women at all embrace the burqa under the pretense of understanding something that is conformist and oppressive. Do you have like any advice for people like that?
Don't be Muslim. You know, women's rights are one of the amazing developments of modern society and civilization. One of the things that religions really aren't too loud about. So it's a very, very big issue. It's an important issue. And I know we had one person talk about women in science today, but it's a much larger issue. I would have liked to see more women here today. Maybe next time there will be. I would say the best response to that is providing and developing role models of women, strong women, who do lead full, strong, supportive lives, who respect human rights, women's rights, and let them do the talking, let them do the leading to bring the rest of the world around to that. That's a tough answer. I don't have an easy, quick answer, but that's the best answer I can find.
A few years ago, some promoters of the intelligent design or creationism, or some bullshit like that, promoted that intelligent design should be taught in public American schools, and it was banned in a county, Duke County, somewhere in some state in the United States. I don't remember what state. My question is, has that ideas of intelligent design to be taught in public schools has progressed or no?
You know, we keep thinking that idea has been dead and buried. We thought that since 1925 in the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee. And recently we had a pretty fabulous court case, was it Massachusetts? The Dover City Court, yeah, where the Discovery Institute came and the school board there had thrown out evolution and demanded that intelligent design be taught as an alternative theory. And they were pretty well, they were strongly and soundly defeated by that court case. The judge all but ridiculed them at the lack of substance to the arguments they were making, and came down with a very strong argument saying there is no basis for intelligent design to be taught in any science class ever. And I don't think anyone in the United States, any school district, at least at this point, is even thinking about challenging it. However, we have seen over the past 10 years, 12 years, again since George W. Bush came to the White House, we have seen more and more conservative Christians coming into Congress in the United States, coming into governorships, coming into state houses. The state of Texas has been embroiled in updating their educational standards over the past 2 years, and it's been dominated by conservative Christians who have taken everything that contradicts anything in the Bible and has taken it out. I don't know how long that's going to last, but with the support they get in the Republican Congress, in 2008, the most frightening thing I saw about the presidential campaign was when there was a debate among the Republicans, and the moderator of the group said, "How many of you believe in evolution?" And I think 2 of the 8, and the other 6 just kind of turned on the 2 and said, "What are you thinking? You're an idiot." And a lot of we just had an election this past month, and we had a lot of the Tea Party phenomenon, as you've probably heard about. Almost all the ones that got Republican nominations said, "Yeah, evolution's a fraud. I'm going to do everything. Global warming's a fraud. Science is a fraud. The only thing real and true is Jesus Christ." So, as I like to say, I wish the argument was dead and buried, but I suspect P.Z. Myers, when he comes up here in just an hour or so, will have a lot more to say about that. But I don't think it's in any way over. I think it's going to be a continuing, ongoing struggle for quite a while. Is that all the time we have for questions then? One more, okay.
He wants to know if, aren't we making religion stronger by fighting them? Because we are giving them too much importance. That we better ignore them and they will die.
Not like it, of course.
Yeah, just like it.
No. I did spend a part of my presentation here explaining how much money the religious community has and the power they have to promote their religion. Even if every religious leader suddenly dropped dead tomorrow, these institutions would have the power to go on for decades and more without anything else happening, just from attrition. So, in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, scientists, philosophers, and great thinkers thought, yeah, it's just going to fade away, we don't need to pay attention to it, we've got better answers. We now have 100 years of evidence saying that was not the right approach. It isn't going away, our answer to take an active approach to doing something about it. Okay, I think I'm going to stop at that point. Okay?
Thanks. I already asked somebody else about it, but I would like to know your opinion, since you work for international organisms and such. What do you think of Scientology? Do you think that's a threat to us? Since most of you know they're getting a lot of tax breaks and they're growing and their ways are a lot more intense than Christianity and classical religions.
They're right in the front of the street.
Yeah, huge church.
Interesting you would ask. I know something about Scientology. I actually joined Scientology for about a year before I became an out-and-out atheist. Part of the transition from Christianity. Not that I ever bought into all the crazy stuff, but I certainly put my money where my mouth was there. My opinion is it's a fad. It certainly created, it's a demonstration of the effect I just described to this gentleman about how when you get a lot of money, you're going to be around for a long time no matter what else you do. The Church of Christian Scientists in the United States, its founder died in 1880 or something, but they had so many people, including the church in their will. It's a dying church. It doesn't do a whole lot. The whole basis of the Christian Science Church is that disease doesn't exist. Disease is a spiritual problem. If you have faith in God, you won't get sick. And I don't think there's a whole lot of people that really buy that. I know there's still congregations out there and they want to believe that, but it's not a growing faith. But they have so many millions in the bank that they've got buildings all over the United States, billions of dollars of church buildings that are empty, but keep them going. They've got the Christian Science Monitor, the amazing news organization built around it, and they continue to come to my door every weekend to see if I have found Jesus. Or is that the Jehovah's Witnesses? So, Scientology is probably a dead-end religion that won't last forever, but it's going to be a long time before that happens.
I think that's it. Please give a round of applause.